Welcome to this second CPD event in a series of 3 webinars on planning in a time of rapid climate change. You can find information on the other webinar in the series on the RTPI website. I'm Claudia, Associate Professor and Reader in Environmental Governance at Birmingham City University, and I am a member of the RTPI West Midlands Regional Activities Committee. To start this seminar, there are first some general information points for all participants. You will be automatically muted as you arrive in the webinar. Please do not turn on your microphone. If you have a question, please submit it in the chat section on the right-hand side of your screen at any time throughout the presentations. We will do our best to ask as many questions as possible during the question and answer session, which happens towards the end of the webinar. But since there are about 100 attendees registered, it may not be possible to answer all the questions. So in this case, we would aim to answer any remaining questions offline. The webinar will be recorded and sent to you with a copy of the presentation after the webinar. The focus of today's webinar is on planning with climate and environmental change in mind, and it highlights the importance of spatial planning and provides examples of climate and environmental change barriers and responses from the national to the local level. The third webinar in the series will focus on adapting the built environment for climate change, and you can join this next Tuesday, 20th of October from 11 AM to 12 PM. The webinar series is also part of the RTPI's Plan the World We Need campaign. The RTPI are calling on governments across the UK and Ireland to capitalise on the expertise of planners to achieve a sustainable, resilient and inclusive recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. To find out more, visit the campaign webpage on the RTPI website, where you can find a film about the campaign, and you can also find accompanying research papers. It is a great pleasure to introduce the first speaker now, a planning champion and an inspiring colleague and friend for almost 2 decades. It's Dr. Alister Scott. He's a long-standing member of the RTPI. He has held a range of academic planning and research positions, including leading the Planning Masters program at Birmingham City University between 2009 and 2017. Alister's current position is as Professor of Environmental Geography at Northumbria University, and he holds the Knowledge Exchange Fellowship on Green Infrastructure. His passion for good strategic planning is evident, amongst others, in his insightful and sometimes hilarious and usually spot-on commentaries on Twitter. Alister has published over 40 peer-reviewed papers and secured grants in excess of £2 million. Past projects included the UK Research Institute's funded Managing Environmental Change at the Rural Urban Fringe, which produced the Roofopoly game, and a follow-on knowledge exchange project, which produced the Participology online resource. Alister's research leadership skills have been recognized with the RTPI Award for Planning Excellence in 2012, and his teaching, research and industry engagement skills with the award as BCO Staff Member of the Year in 2013. I will introduce the second speaker after this presentation, so I hand now over to Alister. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes, it's good.
Okay, great. Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be invited to speak on this topic. And it's also highly appropriate that it's the RTPI West Midlands, because it was the West Midlands that first introduced informally the idea of strategic planning, because it was something important to do. Not because they were told to do it, but because they felt that there was value from it. My title is in front of you. The approach I'm going to take today, though, is critical and self-critical as much as anything else, because I've got a confession to make. The title I deliberately gave because it's nonsensical. That might be a bit of a strange thing to start the talk with, but delivering strategic planning for a particular sector is deeply problematic for me, because to me, strategic planning is about joining the sectors together. So with that in mind, making myself feel uncomfortable, the aim of this talk is to actually make everybody in the room, this virtual room, feel uncomfortable because I do think as planners, as built and natural environment professionals, we need to do a lot more to deliver better strategic planning than the Groundhog Day that I constantly see us being in. So this is going to be an adjunct provocateur talk, and I make no apologies for that. So we do have some strategic planning challenges. They're listed. They might all seem very obvious: the climate emergency, biodiversity, health and well-being, economic development and housing. The one that might seem a bit strange to you is what I call the Eric Pickles syndrome, because it was Eric Pickles back in 2010 that first sort of dismantled what I felt was the regional strategic planning infrastructure that actually has been perpetuated over time. And in a sense, strategic planning has become almost relegated to the sidelines. And I think that is a big issue that we need to address urgently if we're going to tackle these other challenges. So I made a mistake. It's Sir Eric Pickles that is the syndrome that I think we have to tackle. So I'm turning to academic literature for a bit of inspiration, and Albrecht provides, I think, a very good definition that unpacks the ingredients for good strategic planning. And in a sense, these are important because I think we sometimes miss this. We need to bring together that range of participants from a range of different agency backgrounds, and we're working together to design, if you like, both plans and change on the ground. But the idea is to manage that spatial change. And it is, and I like again the word reimagining. It's actually not thinking outside the box, because I think that's a bit of a tired cliche. It's about punching the box to reimagine, punching the edges of the box to reimagine a city, could be countryside, could be at a much bigger regional level. And we need to translate those into actually meaningful outcomes: investment, conservation, regulation, not documents that gather dust on a shelf that are never delivered, that are statements of ambition that don't get delivered. And it would be really, really bad of me not to recognise that in 2015, the RTPI actually did and published a document on strategic planning. And they identified these ingredients. And I think it's quite important here, the idea of a vision, focus, but they have to be strategic and spatial. Collaborative reflects what we've already talked about. I think another ingredient that's often missed is not just leadership, but strong and effective governance, not the multiplicity of governance frameworks. Accountability, and again, this focus on delivery and investment. And I think if we are going to achieve things on the ground, we've got to be more focused on delivery rather than the planning phase. To me, when I look at those ingredients, I see two missing kind of issues. Firstly is this idea of scale and having strategic planning at the right functional scale. And just to sort of blow our minds, just imagine, instead of the current approach to strategic planning, if we actually planned strategically using river basins and actually using those. Just look at how and who we would need to be collaborating with to plan, particularly when we start looking at where we are in Birmingham, with actually the needs to work across the Welsh border. And I just think sometimes those political boundaries can be convenient, but they are not functional. They are not actually meaningful boundaries within which people live their lives or meaningful to tackle the challenge in mind. And here we have the current state of play in English strategic planning. We have a plethora of sectoral documents, whether it's the planning framework, national planning policy framework, the 25-year environment plan, the industrial strategy. And we're seeing some change with a white paper, where actually strategic planning gets very little mention. An environmental bill with nature recovery networks, net biodiversity gain, and we're increasingly getting these local industrial strategies. And in my head, I rarely find it an audience. I haven't got time to ask a question today, but I will just ask it and move on. Very few people have read all of those documents and can actually strategically look at the intersections. And the one intersection that I see in all of those documents is potentially natural capital. Equally, very few people read this document, and arguably this is the most influential document in government that affects how development occurs on the ground. Now, in most of the issues that we're going to talk about in the latter part of this talk, they fall under what's called the strategic case. But it's the economic case that dominates. And one of the challenges is getting the strategic and economic cases to join up more effectively and not to be led by the economic case. And I think there's a real need for reform from national government as well as what's going on below. This slide is from Catriona Riddle Associates, and Catriona is great because she keeps updating strategic planning activity that's going on in the country. My best way of summarising this slide is a pig's breakfast, because we haven't got a coherent approach to strategic planning. It's where authorities agree to work together, or where there has been a combined authority that's got some money off government, again focusing on what's there, to try and build some strategic plan. But it is not a coordinated approach. The areas in pink are areas where there's no strategic planning going on. That is wrong. That has to be wrong. And we need to have a much more effective approach. But we currently have too many silos. And what I want is to get not just middle-aged suited men with umbrellas working across the silos. I want a diverse number of people trying to join up to do proper strategic planning to work across those silos. And is this a good starting point for strategic planning, 300,000 homes? I don't think that's a great starting point. Equally, I don't think another starting point of 30,000 hectares of new woodland is a good starting point. And that means that we've got to get out of our fetish for silos in our particular sectors and find words and concepts that can unite us rather than divide us and get the computer says no syndrome. Now, currently, the duty to cooperate may be phased out, hasn't been seen to be working particularly well. But actually, in theory, it is an excellent tool because it's about strategic cross-boundary matters, of which climate change and all those other issues that I talked about at the beginning could have been discussed. But what is it being used for? Housing need. No plan has been found unsound because of issues to do with flooding, or it hasn't taken climate change seriously. So in my mind, it's not the concept that's the problem. So whilst the government have said in the white paper that duty to cooperate isn't going to continue, it's the tool and it's the way it's been implemented. And again, we have too many planning systems operating in the same space. And this is something that came out from a seminar workshop that I held as part of my NERC Green Infrastructure Fellowship. So we have the town and country planning, the MPPF, which we all are familiar with, but also we have environmental land management schemes that shape resource planning for agriculture and forestry. We have all the utility planning that goes on. And each of those, as well as national infrastructure planning and building services, building regulations, and each of those have their own separate governance frameworks. So if they're all operating on the same space with their own governance frameworks, how the hell do you actually join that up? Who is joining that up? And I'm producing there a slide for some work just to illustrate that I was very proud to be working with colleagues like Claudia when I was at Birmingham City University on a project where we exposed this concept of disintegrated planning. So I'm going to draw very quickly, and it is nothing more than a quick flash in the pan of some work that I've been doing as part of a larger project on how to improve strategic planning for nature conservation. This was funded by the Planning Advisory Service. That workshop report, the report was submitted in February this year, but is yet to be published. So I can't actually talk about the detail of that, but I am going to talk about some work that I did wearing my NERC hat. So I'm sharing some of the information with you. And as you can see, I'm drawing on two key sources. I am not able to draw too much from the interviews. The talk was on delivery, so I need to focus on delivery. So I've got some headlines there, but I just wanted you to see the overall, what I call policy cycle that I've kind of illuminated on the right. Because it's going to do good strategic planning, you need a vision of where you're going to go before you, and then you analyse those in order to get a reasonable delivery. So the headlines: delivery is evidence-based, but also opportunity-based. Getting the governance right is crucial for effective delivery. We have too many governance frameworks, so it's not about having a multitude of governance frameworks. It's about getting good governance that can make things happen on the ground. And the resources for delivery need to match what is being proposed. A key issue in delivery, in my mind, is that often those who deliver are not involved in the design of a plan in the first place. And that is a real concern. And obviously delivery needs to be prioritised into those short, medium and long timescales. Apologies if this sounds like sucking eggs, and this is a statement of the bleeding obvious, but actually some of this sort of now needs unpacking with the way that strategic planning is currently done, because in the workshops that I held, the biggest concern was that often strategic planning was starting from the wrong starting point. 300,000 houses, 30,000 hectares. It wasn't about a vision and desired outcomes. It was about imposed targets. It was about meeting metrics. What was coming out was concepts like placemaking and placekeeping are great concepts that can unite the diverse professions that actually need to be involved, as well as publics. And to give you a starter here, I'm currently working with Essex councils, all the Essex councils, on a series of deliberative sessions. And I've just flagged this up because process, in my mind, matters. But often we're told it's about outcomes. How you get there doesn't matter. It actually does. And what we're doing here is, rather than saying, oh, there's a bunch of experts out there who design how it can happen, we're using the expertise and experience of all of the different councils across Essex and the built and natural professions to actually identify those components in workshop one, to build from what they've identified to address their challenges, and then to identify their own standards. And that's feeding into the Natural England GI Standards project. That kind of approach, I think, is resilient. It means that people get a stake and they can make things happen. The Green Infrastructure Partnership, the Green Infrastructure Strategy the West of England Combined Authority developed. Been privileged to work alongside them. They have developed a set of principles in their strategy and a set of outcomes. That, I think that's a good starting point. But what is transformational in my mind is they're using that then for all project bids for funding that come into the combined authority that actually have to demonstrate how they meet those. So they're starting to join them up, and they join them up across other strategies. So we get too many different strategies. What this is trying to do is to provide a set of principles and outcomes that can help unite. Here's some work that my colleague Max Hislop's done in Glasgow and Clyde Valley, and this is a blueprint which was really built on expert workshops and GIS mapping. It involves both access and habitats, and I suppose it's about identifying those as assets. What are the important things to protect, manage and enhance? Where are the gaps in each of those networks, and how can you actually join them up? to make and create opportunities to improve the connections and the overall connectivity. And again, working at a very large strategic scale, I think linking together access, recreation and habitat is very important. And they cram some excellent infographics that only has been adapted by Glasgow City Region, but the Scottish Government have accepted it. And that to me is the start. It's where you get initiatives actually being incorporated by the national governments. I've worked with Max Hislop again on trying to develop model policies to help local authorities not cut and paste them, but based on working with 19 local authorities, understanding their green infrastructure policies. What are the best ones? What are the best policies that cover all of the multifunctionality of green infrastructure and all the other elements of green infrastructure? But what are the best, if you like, wording? What's the best wording and kind of strong policy wording? So this can serve as a base upon which authorities, many in the audience, might usefully use these to improve the kind of policies that are going on. My last two slides really are about going back to my big challenges, because the thing we're not very good at is actually dealing with these challenges together, because we have people dealing with these in isolation. And my argument is that all of these are joined up. Why is there a wolf in sheep's clothing there? The reason is because we don't want to impose green infrastructure as a magic bullet solution. We need to translate green infrastructure into the language and challenges of those areas. So whilst in this next slide, I've actually put green infrastructure in there, that is wrong. I'm not putting green infrastructure in there. It's an opportunity for green infrastructure to be translated and prioritized to deal with the issues that each of those pose and to try and bring them together rather than have them dealt with in isolation. Because if we deal with them in isolation, particular element might fall out. So social justice to me is a classic victim if it's not incorporated into this. It's a bit like going to the doctor with backache. You get given a painkiller, and actually the back problem is part of a wider set of symptoms, and you need specialists to work together on a holistic plan. You don't do that, and I think that's a really big issue. So to finish, I think strategic planning matters as a process and an outcome. It's about how you do it, how you engage and involve. I think we need to go beyond integration. We need to mainstream the natural environment in strategic planning, but remember it's one component and those other elements need to be in there. And I often think the biggest threat to doing effective nature conservation and green infrastructure is a nature conservation and green infrastructure silo and champions that want it to leave everything else. It is about identifying terms that unite. We need to have an improved governance framework. And maybe this is where at local and regional levels, there's an opportunity space to join up if we have the leadership that can motivate that. And as I said, I think we need to be aware of the danger of environmental silo. My time is up. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Alister. This stimulating and provoking presentation, and I hope that you will be able to put some good questions into the chat bar so that we can pick those up later. I haven't seen any questions for clarification so far, so I would like to proceed straight to the next speaker. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gemma Jerome. She is the Director of Building with Nature. Gemma is an environmental planner with a specialism in the delivery and management and maintenance of green infrastructure. She chairs the British Standards Institute panel for the Emergent Biodiversity Net Gain Standard, and she sits on the advisory group for the Natural England Green Infrastructure Standards Project. Building with Nature is the UK's first green infrastructure benchmark and was a winner in the 2018 RTPI Planning Excellence Awards and won the Sir Peter Hall Award for wider engagement. The The benchmark was developed over 3 years as part of a knowledge transfer partnership between Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust and the University of West England, and has been supported and endorsed from inception by the Gloucestershire Local Nature Partnership. So thank you very much, Gemma. Over to you.
Thank you, Claudia. Are you now seeing my screen?
Yes, it's fine.
Great. Okay. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks to everyone who was able to make it for this lunchtime webinar. So I'm going to spend about 10 minutes telling you about building with nature, and then I'm really looking forward to the questions and discussion at the end. And also to say it was really great to hear Alister talk just now, because Alister also works with Builder in Nature, and we're really lucky to have him on board with this initiative. So there may be people in the audience who know about Builder in Nature, but there may be lots of you who this is the first time you're hearing about the standards we've developed. So hopefully this gives you a good insight into what we're trying to do and what we'd like to do going forward. So I am here to talk about how we see standards having a really important role in speeding up our creative responses to the ecological and climate emergencies. We've developed a set of standards which focus on these 3 key themes. So this is a benchmark for placemaking. It's about defining high quality placemaking, but green infrastructure is the main driver for our approach to delivering high quality green infrastructure through the planning and development process. But our themes of well-being, water and wildlife, they really capture what we believe to be the key ingredients, the constituent components of high quality places that will be resilient going forwards in response to the great challenges we face because of the changes to our climate, and they're ever changing, and because of the loss of our resilience through the loss of space for biodiversity. So we've developed a shared framework. It's an inclusive, accessible and practical how-to guide. So think of it as a how-to guide for all stakeholders involved in shaping the places that we live. Whether that's because of their decision-making role. So we created this with decision makers of place in mind, and that includes people who have statutory duties around placemaking. So think of planners in local planning authorities, think of elected members who support those planning officers and those development managers and those planning committees to bring forward high quality places, and that might be new places, or it might be a regeneration of existing places and retrofit of the places we already call home. It might be animateurs of place. So I like to think of this as the public, but actually, what do we mean by that? We mean communities, and there's many communities. It might be communities of geography, communities of interest. We're talking here about individuals, and another way to think of this group of stakeholders is beneficiaries, people who benefit from living in places that have green infrastructure underpinning the resilience, the functions and benefits that we can deliver through high quality places. That stakeholder group may also be, we might think of those who engage in the planning process, but it's also those who live, work and play and learn in the places that we're trying to influence through these standards. And then the final group who we can help and support through this standards framework is entrepreneurs, investors and creator makers of place. So typically we talk about developers and house builders, but really when you start to unravel who that includes, it's a whole host of people with very different priorities who have to come together and bring forward places through the planning system. So strategic land teams and land agents, design teams and planning agents, construction professionals, land managers, grounds maintenance teams, and then all the disciplinary specialists, the ecologists, the landscape architects, the engineers and the planners. This this is a tool that's been developed and designed with all of those stakeholders in mind, recognizing that actually the strength, but also the complexity of green infrastructure design and delivery is because of all of those people who have a vested interest in its delivery. So the standards framework we developed, Building with Nature, it's a set of standards which we have created in response to all of the needs and also the perceived problems and challenges of that group of stakeholders we've just talked about. We believe the missing ingredient is to bridge the priorities and the needs of the actors, agencies and end users of green infrastructure, and to actually more effectively, consistently secure high quality green infrastructure through placemaking and place keeping is quality. So we believe the missing ingredient is quality. We have a great range of tools, assessment methodologies and mechanisms, some well established in the market, some emergent, to measure what we need to do. And I might just mention biodiversity net gain, I might mention urban greening factor, and also some other standards that are being used and that people are gearing up to use. Absolutely, we need those tools. They're very clearly helping us to see what we need to do. However, in our understanding, when we develop Building with Nature and our continued conversation with industry professionals, what's missing is and what's been defined as a need is a guide to answer the question of how. So if we're focused, as Alister said, on delivery, on securing those outcomes through what we deliver on the ground, through what we then maintain once it's in situ, the question is how. How we deliver places which meet new policy requirements, but also start to put nature at the heart of decisions. So what we're also talking about here is a shift in thinking in industry. So it's not just we have to do it. And the role of requirements and mandatory requirements absolutely it goes without question. But what we've got here is a voluntary mechanism to start to raise the baseline in what industry believes they have a duty to deliver, but also unlocking that that creative urge to do something different, to do something better, and that collective responsibility. People might be cynically thinking it's only ever about profit with developers, but we are starting to work with developers, house builders, and all of those stakeholders I mentioned who are involved in the design and delivery of places. We are starting to work with people who want to differentiate themselves in the market, who want to put decisions about design, but also sales, marketing, and how they tell the story about what they've done and why it's different. They are starting to put nature at the front of that. So essentially, we've defined quality. And Building with Nature, the standards we've developed, and as Claudia very kindly introduced, we developed this through a great knowledge transfer partnership, University West of England Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, back in 2015. The first few years very much was focused on making sure we were identifying existing gaps. So this isn't about duplicating anything we have already, it's about investigating where people are still struggling, where policy isn't being followed, where we can support the planning system and the very conscientious group of planners we have in the UK, how we can support people to actually more effectively, more consistently deliver against policy. But we're not here to duplicate the planning system. This is about raising the bar. So what we've done is we've created a set of standards which are principle-led, and they're open enough, they're not prescriptive, that they can be applied to each stage of the green infrastructure life cycle. So the standards are being applied at design stage, at the planning stage, pre-application, pre-implementation stage. We can apply the standards again at implementation, at the construction and the build-out stage, making sure that whole new and different set of professionals are adhering to what's been given planning permission, and then when that place is in use. So actually at the long-term management and maintenance stage, how are we supporting the planning's role, the planning system's role for enforcement? How are we then making sure that the functions and benefits, the green infrastructure features that have been included, that they are continuing to deliver those functions and benefits into the long term? So the standards can be applied again at that stage. I'm also here to let you know that we are doing it. We have so far delivered Building with Nature accreditations on the equivalent number of planning applications or local planning documents. So we're looking here at over right now, and it's an ever increasing set of people using the standards, but over 15,000 homes, which we can now say have been delivered with higher quality green infrastructure than would have been otherwise. The standards themselves, this is another great thing about Building with Nature, that it doesn't require each and every planning authority to have their own definition of high quality. People are starting to use Building with Nature signposting out, so planning applicants can have a complementary definition of high quality that works alongside planning policy. The standards are kept up to date and refreshed by a standards board. And that includes members from key actors and agencies, and it's their role to make sure the standards are fresh and up to date with changes in legislation, policy and practice. That takes some of the pressure of planning authorities to constantly change in line with the policy review cycle. And in that way, we see very much Building with Nature as supportive of the existing planning structures and systems and policies that we have in place, whether that's national or local. Building with Nature standards are available and for free and open source. So we've very much developed these with the mission of raising the quality of green infrastructure across the board. However, people may not use the standards if they are not when we don't incentivize people to use them. So we very much were clear from an early stage that to incentivize people to use good practice guidance that's embedded within the standards, we needed a mechanism to do that, and we developed an accreditation and award system. So we offer accreditation both pre and post construction stages, and we encourage applications from different types of development. So this has been very much designed and tested with industry, so we're clear that it works on different types of development, residential led but also commercial, and we're starting to see people use it on green and open space sites as well. It's been designed with major applications in mind. It's been designed to be applicable in England, Scotland and Wales. That's where we have tested the standards, so it's a UK-wide set of standards. It doesn't need to be adapted either for local policy or indeed for devolved nations. And we're pushing people through to make sure the focus is on what's delivered on the ground. So we have a design accreditation from master planning stage, but we are pushing people through to full accreditation. And at that stage, there is 2 possible accreditations, good and excellent. So it also helps to drive forward what's perceived as best practice in the sector, whilst allowing the majority of people to focus on what is now considered good. This very much hasn't been designed to just award the exemplars. The good standards have been developed with good practice right now in mind. So everybody, if they think about green infrastructure at an early enough stage of the planning process, they can target Building with Nature good and achieve accreditation. It's just about collecting the evidence. So if there's questions about the assessment process, I'm happy to take those. Just to say as well, the standards are also being used to assess policy documentation, so it can be used to assess local plans, supplementary planning documents, GI strategies, etc. As a summary then, Building with Nature, what can we deliver? The key thing people are using Building with Nature to support is reducing planning uncertainty by having a shared framework of standards, so planners and planning applicants both having a shared understanding and a very clear idea about what the parameters of quality are in the particular context of an application. That is helping to reduce planning uncertainty and smooth passage through planning. So that's the feedback we're getting from the people who are using, and that includes local planning authority users and also industry end users. It's supporting the delivery of a wide range of benefits, whether that's for biodiversity and wildlife, or for people and the health and well-being outcomes associated with green infrastructure. And ultimately, the reason we have developed Building with Nature is we want to create practical knowledge and skills around how we tackle the climate and ecological emergencies. In terms of local planning authorities specifically, this is a collation of some of the feedback we've had from people using Builder in Nature. So it's an evidence-based, consistent approach that we are encouraging the use of a shared definition of green infrastructure at an early project stage, making sure that an applicant understands green infrastructure is valued for its multifunctionality, and that the features delivered through development are connected and help to deliver the nature recovery network, whether that's local nature recovery network, national nature recovery network. There's a focus on clearly documenting the role of green infrastructure, that's including the planning application, but also we encourage people to put green infrastructure as a focus within community engagement, community consultation, because many people who might feel uneasy or even object to new development, often nature is a key part of their nervousness, of what they perceive to be quality of new development and how it disregards nature. And the role of accreditation as an external verification of a site's green infrastructure offering is something planning authorities are starting to use. And the last one there is offering some reassurance about how the features will be implemented and then managed and maintained post-construction. An example here, just very quickly, of other ways we're supporting local planning authorities. At the moment, we worked with Cotswold District Council to develop a pre-application advice note. So what they wanted is a very clear, shall we say, shop front. So when applicants come forward, it's very clear to them what's expected in terms of quality. So green infrastructure, high quality green infrastructure, is part of their ask from new development. And they used the wording of the standards to help inform this, but this isn't about saying you have to use Builder in Nature. However, it is a tool that we would encourage and support and signposting people to use as an external verification. But the key thing here is that we're at Builder in Nature, we're interested in supporting local planning authorities to be clearer about what they expect from development in terms of delivering the benefits of green infrastructure through the delivery of new places. And Builder in Nature accreditation is one way to support that, but the standards can also be used to create strong policy. So drawing to a close then, it's really important to us that we are recognising the challenges that the planning industry is facing, that we are helping to support responses to the climate emergency, mitigation, adaptation, whether that's through the delivery of new places or whether it's about how we are managing the spaces we have. In terms of ecological emergency, making more space for nature, putting nature at the heart of decisions is really key. And yes, there are emergent ways of doing that. Builder in Nature works and aligns well with biodiversity net gain, for example, but having a quality standard, we believe, is a really important complementary way of making it clear as to if we just make more space for nature, that's really going to help us to tackle the climate and ecological emergency. Also, we're now starting to talk about a health emergency, focusing on outcomes, making sure everybody has access to high quality green spaces that they can enjoy as well. And then we also have an emergent narrative, as I'm sure you're all thinking about. How do we build back better? You know, how do we create green growth? Making sure that nature-based solutions are seen as a very cost-effective and multifunctional, multi-beneficial way of delivering economic benefits. So it's really clear to me that green infrastructure needs to be a core part of that. And the last slide I'll just end on, I know we want to move to questions, is that we were really pleased to see that some work the RTPI did recently on tools that people can be using. Builder in Nature was recognised as a tool that helps at each stage of the challenge of meeting climate needs, climate climate tools that can help with adaptation, mitigation, thinking about climate justice, plan making and development management. So as you can see here from this tweet, we were really pleased to see our recognition of Building with Nature's role in the mix of tools that LPAs can be using right now. And that's it. Thank you, Claudia.
Great, thank you very much, Gemma, for the very informative talk. We got 2 questions so far, so let's go straight to the first one. They so far seem largely targeted at the second discussion, but it's always good to also hear Alister's more strategic angle on the questions. So the first one is, it's an exciting opportunity and useful tool for a wide range of stakeholders. Speaking from the point of local authority DM officer, how would you recommend that we try and encourage developers to get on board with this? From experience, the biggest hurdle seems to be basically how to incentivize this. And would you have examples from specific, authorities, how this could be addressed?
Sure, definitely. And as you said, Claudia, keen to bring Alister into these discussions as well. So I'll just give my perspective, and it will be brief, but I could talk for a long time on this and share experience, share more examples for people offline if they'd like to pick this up. So we're currently developing some local planning authority training. We very kindly were given some grant funding from Esme Fairbairn Foundation to work with planning authorities specifically as they face greater and greater stretches and pressures on their resource, and so it was identified that support around understanding green infrastructure was key, and so we're developing some training around that, and we'll be launching that later this year. From that training, what we've identified as a clear need, and I appreciate the speakers coming from the perspective of a development manager, but a clear need for understanding, creating a shared understanding across departments within planning authorities, within local authorities. So we've been working with a number of authorities where we're bringing together the development management teams with the policy teams, because often what happens is there's you can have great green infrastructure policy, but then it isn't clearly communicated to the team whose job it is then to interpret that to the applicant, and that we can lose a lot of quality interpretation in that gap. So our training is an opportunity to bring those departments together. From the point of view, if you have green infrastructure strategy, or it's included as a clear policy in a local plan, if you have that in place in your planning authority, fantastic, that's the first hurdle. You're making a very clear message to the applicants who come forward. But as this question highlights, you then still have to make the case to the applicant. So making it very clear that high quality green infrastructure is a requirement of the planning process, and then signposting people to a clear set of standards about what you mean by high quality green infrastructure, and that's where Building with Nature can be used. That is basically making it easier for the applicant to understand what you mean, and essentially the standards act as a way of instructing the design team. So the key professionals, ecologists, landscape architects, SUDS engineers, they're all working from the same understanding of what is required from the master plan. That you need to work together to ensure these features are protected, these features are created, these features are enhanced. And I think development managers are starting to signpost people out to the standards and use examples where that the accreditation has allowed the applicant to give some reassurance back to the planning authority, including often it's the elected member who needs that reassurance, that has been done, that we don't just take the design team's word for it that they've done it. That's probably my answer for now. I don't want to go on and on.
Thank you,
I've got two very quick, probably pragmatic points actually, because one of the points I was trying to make is that we need to get, if I come from an environmental background, more into a developer mindset. And the one thing a developer is going to want is a way to get speedy planning permission. So one of the benefits of going through a standards process like this and getting accreditation in that sense is it certainly can help improve the way that a development can go through the planning system, and that's certainly been evidenced from the applications. I deliberately didn't mention building with nature in my talk, because clearly Gemma was able to do that very, very effectively, and that's one of the things that's really important. The second point is also pragmatic, because from a developer's point of view, it's the profits, and ultimately good green infrastructure can actually increase the value of that development for the wildlife, the people that are going to live there, but potentially also for the actual profit that they make from it. So getting green infrastructure to work harder, to raise the bar, can actually impact on the bottom line for the developer. And I think just understanding how that plays out, but recognizing the social justice issues, because what you don't want to then create enclaves that are only for the rich and wealthy. It needs to be tied to affordable housing as well. That can be a very important outcome. And I think that to me are the key messages. You need to get more into the mindset of a developer to address it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. The next set of questions relate a bit to each other, and they are around, first of all, is it definitely blue and green infrastructure or just green infrastructure? How do we have examples of how the building with nature standard actually made it into specific policies? And also then in terms of the cost, does everything cost, or is it only certain parts of the accreditation? Are there basically pre or post advice that is actually free?
Yeah, okay. I'll go first, and then I'd also like Alister to say something probably again about other alternatives to building with nature, like the model policies that have been developed in Scotland, because I think LPA should absolutely be looking at those. Anyway, I'll start with answering a couple of those questions from a building with nature point of view. So yes, we have examples of planning authorities who are creating policies around high quality green infrastructure, but we had an example with Tewkesbury Borough Council. I just use this as one illustrative example where we were developing a building with nature policy, and that was asking for applicants to use building with nature. However, and this is always the case with we always need a precedent. The planning inspector felt at this point it's not so helpful to require an applicant in a context of trying to encourage as much development as possible, to require a paid for surface as part of the planning process. I understand that. So what we then developed with TBC was Tewkesbury Borough Council, sorry, was a policy which was focused on high quality green infrastructure, and they picked up some wording from Building with Nature to do that. And then it was Building with Nature was highlighted as a preferred mechanism for demonstrating how that the scheme was meeting their standard of high quality green infrastructure. But the standards are free to use. So to kind of segue through to the question about fees, accreditation is a two-stage process of assessment and audit, and there is a fee associated with the assessment and audit of a physical development. The assessment fee is set by the assessor. So I have a network of approved assessors working around the UK. We have 70 trained up as approved assessors. They sit within the design team, so they're bringing a scheme forward using the standards. Building with Nature centrally audit all of our schemes, and there's a fee attached to that. So from a developer point of view, they pay the assessment and audit to get a formal accreditation in place. If a planning authority wants a policy document accredited, again, there's an assessment audit, but that's one fee brought together, and I can provide fee amounts kind of offline. That's something I'm happy for people to approach me about by email. Claudia, was that the, we have to remind me the question now. I think we can move to Alister.
The only other one was the blue-green. I'm not sure whether you fully...
Oh, yeah. both together. But Alister, over to you.
Well, yes. I mean, if I attach the blue-green thing, because I think that's actually a very important point about sometimes the crazy nature of the terms that we invent to obscure, obfuscate at times. Green infrastructure apparently implicitly includes blue. Well, forgive my sort of cynical smile there, because actually often blue is forgotten in that. It's not forgotten in building with nature, as you saw very explicitly, that there is a set of water standards. But often the blue bit and the coast, for example, can easily be seen and neglected there. In many of our cities we have blue, but they happen to be concreted over, so the river isn't visible because it's been either concreted over or it's canalised. So blue is neglected. I much prefer a living infrastructure label, because we can have blue, green, yellow, pink, whatever. As long as it's living, it's something that needs managing. And to my mind also, there's a risk in this debate that somehow the engineer that's involved with the grey, dealing with maybe some very important engineering operations, is somehow seen as all of this green infrastructure is somehow better. And I don't think that's not the narrative we want to create, because nature-based solutions are important, but often it's grey, green and blue working together to create something. It's not always either or. And I think often the debate gets misconstrued. So I think and this is part of bringing all of the different players together. And to my mind, part of the value of building with nature and all the other types of tools that are working, if they're done properly, you're getting the range of parties in the room at the outset, at that design phase. If those wrong people are in there, they can do building with nature, and no problem with building with nature, but it won't work properly, because if you neglected those engineers, the computer says no, it's going to come back later on in the stage, and that's just going to throw things up. So the big lesson to me is that you need to have the blue, green, grey people all together, and then you think about what is the best solution for the challenges that we face, making sure that you join up at the appropriate scale. And this goes back to my point about functionality. So I suppose I'm trying to link up several of those elements. And there are a lot of other schemes out there that could place or be part of a building with nature type activity. But I think the thing that to stress is it's about raising the bar. It's about getting them on people's radar. It's about getting people to think. And if we can create a process that does that, building with nature ticks the box in my point. Every other thing needs to have this engagement process up front. Thanks.
Thank you, Alister.
Thank you very much. We have one more interesting question, but I don't think we have time to answer it, so I'll just read it out and we'll respond to it in writing. From a minerals and waste development perspective, how might developers strike a balance between the calls for biodiversity gain, net biodiversity gain, incorporating green infrastructure whilst maintaining usable arable land once a site is restored? So I think there's quite a few interesting issues between green infrastructure and biodiversity net gain and how that sits together. But either we try and address it also within the next seminar or offline, because I'm afraid we are drawing to a close. So I would just like to thank all the speakers very much for these very engaging and informative presentations, and to all participants, especially the 6 who put questions, very interesting questions forward. Thank you very much. Thank you also to Ella Sumner for all her organizational and technical support, much appreciated. We would like to hear what you think. So those on Twitter, please use @RTPI West Midlands, West Mids abbreviated, and please do complete the survey that will appear once that seminar closes. If you subscribe to the RTPI's YouTube channel, it's on youtube.com, the RTPI, you will be notified of all the RTPI's videos, and as soon as they are released, you basically get the message and you can access these. A recording of this session will be going up very soon, so if you're watching the recording, also please do consider leaving a comment and hopefully give us the thumbs up. For details of other RTPI webinars in the coming weeks, please visit www.rtpi.org.uk/events. So this concludes today's seminar. Thank you very much, everyone. and goodbye until next time.
Thank you.